Welcome to the Contracting Officer Podcast. It's not just for contracting officers. If you work anywhere in the government acquisition world, this podcast is for you. Whether you work for government or industry, we're here to help you understand a little more about how the other side thinks. This episode is brought to you by Skyway Acquisition. Skyway helps you know more, do more, and win more in the government market. To learn more, visit skywayacq.com. Today, our guest is our friend and retired contracting officer, Shelley Hall. Shelley and I discuss a very important topic, contractor performance assessments. All right, let's get started. So in your real life, if you're hiring a plumber or someone to build a deck on your house, I use that example all the time, how do you find out if they're actually any good? Well, there's tools like Angie's List online where you can check what other people think about a contractor. And CPARS is the way the government does that.
Absolutely. That's it's interesting that you mentioned Angie's List. I just used Angie's List to look up some work I need to be done after Hurricane Matthew. But yes, it's basically a report card. It's a report card of contractor performance. That's what the CPARS is.
All right, let's define this thing. CPARS is an acronym, stands for Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, CPARS. And CPARS is designated as the federal government-wide solution for collection of contractor performance information. It's required by FAR Part 42.15, and that's probably our only FAR reference for today. It's required to be used in source selection evaluation. So anytime you're doing a FAR Part 15 source selection, you have to use past performance information that comes out of CPARS as part of your assessment. But it's not just CPARS. There's more to it, right? How does this work, Shelley?
Yeah, it's like those commercials, but wait, there's more. And this is the government alphabet soup, the CPARS, the PIPERS, and the FAPIS. The CPARS system collects that information and passes it to the Past Performance Information Retrieval System, which is PIPERS, the report card.
I thought maybe that was Peepers, but that would be a different website,
Peepers,
right?
Whatever. It's whatever you want to call it.
Peepers, don't go to peepers.gov.
I was going to say, I have a feeling that might be very bad. That would be kind of like whitehouse.com. Don't ever go to that. Anyhow, and then it goes to the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information System, which is FAPIS. Oh my goodness. Which is the government-wide performance information repository where past performance information can be retrieved by those government agencies. So it's a flow. All
right, so let me walk through that again since we got I got a sidetrack there. So CPARS collects the information, passes it to PIPERS and to FAPIS. So CPARS is where you collect it, and PIPERS and FAPIS are where you can view that information. And the websites, real quick, it's cpars.gov, cpars.gov, it's pipers.gov, ppirs.gov, and then fapis.gov is fapiis.gov. So it's just the acronyms.gov is how you get there.
Yes. So those are fairly simple to get to.
So now that I've said the websites, so I can just go on there and I can look at contractors' performance whenever I want?
Oh, no.
No?
No. CPARS and PIPERS they're both restricted sites, and it's only those individuals who are part of the assessing chain for the contract. So that would be normally the folks like the program manager, the assessing official, the contracting officer representative, those kind of folks. The reviewing official, there's always a reviewing official, which is one level above the assessing official. So those folks that are in the assessing chain, or for the personnel working on a source selection. Now, contractors can only view their own data also. So
if I'm a contractor, I can go on and I can see all of my ratings, but I can't see other companies, my competitors' ratings.
And yes. So CPARS and PIPERS are both restricted, but FAPIS has both a government-only accessible site and a public access site. So you, me, anybody can get into FAPIS, and we can see at a very general level, kind of collectively, bad reports, terminations for convenience or cause, and those kind of things. And by the way, prior to award of any contract or any contract modification, the contracting officer has to have a FAPIS check for any action over $150,000 in their contract file. So that's how they know that very last look to make sure that a contractor is responsible as defined in FAR Part 9. Oh, I came up with another FAR reference. And so it's just important to remember that the info flows from the CPARS where it's input down to PIPERS and then to FAPIS.
Okay, let's talk about when this happens in the cycle here. So we're talking about rating contracts, and we're talking about retrieving that information. It's past performance information for future use. So the information is entered into CPARS by, like you said, the program manager or the core or the COTAR or someone like that. When do they enter the information?
Well, now basically a report has to be prepared every 365 days of contract performance. So if it's a fiscal year driven contract, then at the end of the reporting period, which is 30 September, then that starts the cycle for when they start inputting that information.
So lots of data flows in October. Lots of data probably flows in January for calendar year-based acquisitions. Right. So if you're looking to review that information for use in evaluating contractors, if you're on the government side, you go in and look at it anytime, is right. It's not necessarily related to the time. It's when you need it. And that's usually when you're doing a source selection. You go into CPARS, or actually PIPERS, and you look at the ratings of the people that have bid on your contract. Is that right?
It is. And it kind of, it's one of those it depends things. If you're part of a source selection team, then you've gone to your organization's CPARS focal point and they've given you access to the actual CPARS, which is that all that information that's initially put in there. So you can actually go in and see the CPARS rating. If you are doing something, let's say you're not doing a Part 15 source selection. Let's say you're doing a simplified acquisition, a commercial FAR Part 12 acquisition, something that's outside of FAR Part 15. Well, you still have to do responsibility determination. You still have to make sure that they have adequate past performance, that they have good performance ratings. So because we don't want contractors that have poor performance ratings, doing our work. So then right. you could look in, you could request access to PIPERS and get into the PIPERS system, which again, that's through your CPARS focal point of the organization, or you could just look in FAPIS if that's all that's required for you to look at. So it just depends.
Linking this to the time zones that we always talk about on the podcast, acquisition time zone wise, this is source selection zone is the primary point where this is happening. Up from the execution time zone, this covers all of the zones. It starts out in the honeymoon zone. The entire performance zone, this is when you're getting those ratings. And then the repeat and wrap-up zone, this is after the contract's over, you get a final rating, right? So it's the entire time, contractors, that you're being rated, and that rating is being documented.
Right. It's kind of it lives, it lives with the lifespan of the contract. So it starts out, before the contract's ever awarded and then follows through that contract. And something you said kind of piqued something in my mind is, one of the things that contracting officers look at too, or source selection teams, is if you have started out, maybe your first CPARS was like a really good CPARS, and then your option was exercised on your contract, and that second year your performance not so much, and then the third year maybe even worse. And so that a downward trend can really be very damaging. Or conversely, let's say maybe you started out with satisfactory, and then by the end of performance you got to exceptional. Well, then that tells them that that's a motivated contractor that's really gotten into the performance of the contract and doing well. So those trends across the years also make a difference.
That's a great point. It's very useful for that. And you also brought up something we should have mentioned, how the rating system works. It's like a 5-star review kind of thing. What are the different ratings you can get in CPARS? Besides just, there's always a text area where you have to describe what you're doing, but do you get gold
Right.
stars for this?
Sometimes I think that might be easier because to me it's still a little bit on the subjective side, but they have unsatisfactory. You don't want to get those. Then they have marginal.
Right.
Then they have satisfactory, and then they have. And I forget what the next one's called. It's like very satisfactory or something like that. And then exceptional. Those are those the big hoo-ha ratings. What's interesting is I kind of can read through, well, this is what makes up a marginal rating. And, depending on if I'm a really hardcore CO and the contractor's performing their job, I might say, satisfactory is the best a contractor can ever do. They're doing the work.
That's what their contract is to do. It's to do this. We expected them to do it well. Why should I
give them an exceptional? So, or if you're, if you're a contracting officer and you understand that, the contractors, they live and die by these ratings, that, then you want to quantify that exceptional rating to say why they did that. But really, the CPARS is supposed to be a really good snapshot of contract performance, both the good and the bad things. People seem to think it's always just a way to ding the contractor, but it's also a way to say things that they did very well.
Okay, we'll come back to that. That's a great point. Before we get into the human factors involved here, let me summarize why this is so important. So first, yes, it's required. It's required on supply contracts over $5 million and service contracts over $1 million. This is how the government gets past performance information on current contracts. This gives the evaluators, the source selection officials, the raters and contracting officers, and the source selection authority, this gives them that past performance information. Now, a lot of source selections, you are asked in the RFP to provide past performance information, and contractors provide all of these incredible past performance situations where they've overachieved and everyone was super happy and they delivered on time and on budget. So to make sure that the government gets the whole story, CPARS are required as well, because the good and the bad go into the CPARS.
Right, and you're right. I have never seen a contractor ever send in poor past performance information ever, and I wonder why they do that. And what makes that interesting to me is when we go from the span of like a sealed bid up to low price technically acceptable to a full trade-off. And especially when people are convinced that trade-off, that they want to trade better past performance for a higher price when they get to that trade-off. But if everybody has exceptional past performance, then it still comes down to price. So you're still really doing an LPTA. So and again, but when those teams are looking at that past performance information, they're really looking at strengths and weaknesses for the contractor, because there may be certain areas where it's like if they just did satisfactory in that area, I'm okay with that because that's not the technical piece or that's not the cost piece or whatever. Other areas they may say, oh man, they've really got crappy management across the board for 5 years of a contract, and I can't deal with that. I can't deal with 5 years of crappy management. So
you tripped right into the next topic there about why the government should care so much about CPARS. So this information in the system, it's crucial as part of the past performance evaluation for these competitive awards. This is where you get these strengths and weaknesses and where you may assess trends. Okay, so this contractor, they generally start a little rocky, but by the end, boy, they've always satisfied their customers. They get it together. Or these guys always come in and they sold a good game, but when it comes to performance, by the end of the third year, no one's happy with them. It's good to know that when you're working a source selection, besides the fact that it's required by law, that's of course government people should care. It's law, but this is a human system, and government officials who actually input that CPARS information, they got to ensure that it's objective and factual, despite the fact there's humans involved here. So there's a couple things that come into play, and it's just like reviews on Yelp or on Google or whatever. Only people that are very happy or very sad or angry about the service or supply that they've received generally take the time or energy to write anything in the system. So I think CPARS works a lot the same way, where you see a lot of write-ups for unsatisfactory and a lot of write-up for exceptional, but there's a lot of just satisfactory or, very satisfactory, whatever that middle one is. There's a lot of those that there's not a lot of support behind the ratings. So when the program manager or the Corps goes in and they're really angry at the contractor and they type up a whole diatribe of why they're so upset, how do we make sure that doesn't get launched out into the world? What happens? I should say, what happens if maybe it's not true? Maybe if there's a little too much emotion involved. Is there any kind of check and balance on the government side for that?
There is. There's always checks and balances, which is very important to have. The process is supposed to take, the entire process is supposed to take about 120 days. In other words, that's from the start until it's finalized. The contractor has 60 days to challenge the CPARS or input comments to the CPARS. Now, those comments will be, they're viewable also. So, in other words, if you got a satisfactory rating, for example, but you kind of had an explanation as to why you got a satisfactory rating, they, assessors and raters and evaluators can see that, there was an explanation for,
yeah.
if they care. To me, it could be just somebody whining. But anyhow, sorry, they just be like, whatever. Oh, I couldn't do any better. But the reality of the way that the system works is that you really need to challenge the CPARS or get your comments in there within 15 days, because at the end of the 15th day, that information automatically goes through to the PIPERS and the FAPA system. And so then let's say that on the 50th day, you provide comments or you challenge the CPARS and you go back and they change the CPARS rating, then there will be a revised CPAR rating in the system, but that old rating is still in there for people to see. And, depending on how bad of a, if we see it in print, we tend to believe it's true, right? So you kind of go, well, how did they go from this to this? And did they have to coerce the contracting officer or whatever? But
so the whole record is in there.
And what people need to understand is normally the people that are assessing the contracts is your contracting officer representative, your program manager, those types of folks, your quality assurance personnel. And the CO may not be as involved in the process as they should be. And so they don't really look at anything until a challenge comes in, and then they go, oh my goodness, why did the Corps write this information? Because the Corps wasn't looking at the totality of the performance from the CO's perspective. All their deliveries were on time, the end user is satisfied with it, and so forth and so on. So, and again, it is, anytime a human touches it, that makes something more subjective, or, you could have a Corps that doesn't care much for you, and then they're going to write bad things, or a Corps that really loves you.
Right. So best practice is that the CO would look at what the Corps is putting in before it hits the system, before it's finalized in the system, and before you have to go through the whole challenge process where the contractor can say that's not really true.
And in fact, what I always did as a contracting officer is I would tell the this CPARS assessing officials that I wanted them to send me, email me a copy of the verbiage that they were going to put in there, and that I wanted to look at it to.
It's okay. You want to prove it before they let their craziness get out.
Because the reality is that the top person who is the reviewing official is usually somebody pretty high in the requirements chain. And they're the ones that are going to have to deal with any challenges. And so as the assessing official, they don't want those in there. And just to go back a little ways, the ratings are unsatisfactory, marginal, satisfactory, very good, and exceptional. Those are the official ratings.
So it's not very satisfactory.
Yeah. It was we knew it was very something, but it's very good. I had to go back. I like the back because it was driving me a little bit crazy.
Let me run through the timeline real quick, just because we've been talking about all these things that happen, but let me run through this again. So 365 days after a contract starts is the first rating, and every 365 days thereafter. After that 365 days, there's a 60-day process for the CPARS information to be entered in the system and to be finalized. But there's 120 days. Okay. The first 15 days, so the first however many days are taken up by the government folks getting the information in. And if they've done it well, then it's a team effort and not just one person either raging or praising a contractor. It's the overall team's assessment of the performance. And it's very fair and factual. At that point, contractors are able to view it and can challenge it or otherwise support, yes, it was satisfactory, and here's why it was only satisfactory and not exceptional. And that's also supposed to be objective and factual, but it's people here, and it's salesmanship, I'm sure, in some of those as well. So after that 15 days, the government has a chance to reassess and revise their rating. And then after 120 days, it's all locked in there.
Yes.
And then it's locked in there forever.
That's what they tell you. However, at my last organization before I retired, I was the CPARS focal point, and what I found out is really those ratings can be pulled back and changed at any point in time. So if it was really and the contractor really feels like they didn't get a chance to have their say, or for whatever reason they didn't see it in time, or whatever. If it is factually incorrect, if it's completely inaccurate, then you can go to the CPARS system, folks. The CPARS is run by the Navy, and you can go to them, and then they will unlock that rating and will send it back to the assessing official to make a change. But
that's good to know. So,
and people, they won't tell you that, though. They won't tell you. That's a secret.
But you just did. You just did. So really, it's to your benefit, contractors, to check the system. And if you think that something is an inaccurate representation of what really went on the contract, you need to work with the government, not be all mad, not sue, but work with those people to make it more accurate, to make it something that everyone can live with. Because if you don't, that information is out there, and it's out there forever. The ratings are out there on your oldest contracts to your newest contracts. Even if a lot has changed in your company over the last 10 years, there's still ratings from 10 years ago out there?
Yes. And I think they retain them. It's some ridiculous number of years. It's something like 20 years after final closeout. And, if it's like a cost type contract, those things can take 10 years to close out. So
CPARS is kind of like a bad tattoo.
It is.
If you let it go, it's going to be with you forever.
It's yours forever, and yes.
So we've actually been talking about why industry should care. We shifted from why government should care to why both should care to sort of why industry should care. Your business lives and dies by these performance ratings. If you have a history of bad CPARS in the system, you may have trouble winning new awards because the government looks at these things. Those bad tattoos are out there for everyone to see. If you get good ratings, however, those are there for everyone to see too, and that can help you win awards. These good ratings help you win the next award. They help you get the option exercised, because if you have a history of we did good, then we did bad, then we did horrible in your CPARS record, and you have a new contract that they're trying to decide, should we exercise the next year's option? And they see that you did great, you did not so good. They look at your CPARS history and it says, hey, boy, by the third year, these guys always tank. They may decide not to exercise the option because they can see that you always go downhill in these things. So industry should care. This is your permanent record, right?
This is your permanent record, yes.
If you have bad ratings, these are really hard to overcome. If they're unfair or inaccurate bad ratings, like you said, there are ways that you can continue to work with the government to remedy that. But if you actually screw something up, the rest of the government's going to know or be able to know if they use the system.
Absolutely. And it's a contractor's right to challenge those ratings. And, I've seen contractors that, even though they got a satisfactory, they challenged that because they believed that it should be a very good. And as long as they have, you can't just make it up and say, well, we don't think satisfactory is right because we did okay and whatever. But I mean, but if you say, they talk in there specifically about our poor delivery schedule, and and then when you challenge the rating, you come back and you say, well, the government changed the delivery requirements 10 times, and they kept extending the delivery at no cost, and so we didn't fail to deliver on time. It was government failure that caused those deliveries to be late. So we should challenge for that. And again, that's why the CO has to be in that somewhere in that process, because the program manager may not know that. They may just say, hey, our original delivery date was the 10th of December, and I didn't get it until the 25th of February. So what happened?
Right. And even if the rating doesn't change, at least the contractor gets to state their side of the story, so that when someone sees that satisfactory rating, they say, okay, well, I kind of understand that maybe there's two sides, because there's always two, probably three sides to every story.
Many sides to each story. You're absolutely right.
Okay, let's wrap this up. To summarize, CPARS, the Contractor Performance Assessment Rating System, is the system that gathers this contract performance information that's then retrieved through PPARS and FAPAS by the government folks. The ratings have to be objective and factual, and the contractors, you have the ability to challenge ratings that you feel are inaccurate or unfair and get your point of view on record. And please do that. I know you get emails whenever a CPARS has been issued for one of your contracts. You get an email that says, a CPARS has been issued. It's time for you to go in and look at it. And if you don't, you may not even know what bad news is out there. So remember, CPARS is basically the Angie's List, because it's more structured than something like Yelp or like Google reviews. And as you can imagine, only very happy and very angry people take the time to really write up a lot of stuff in the system. The rest of it, it's all just it's okay, it's in the middle. And the more information that's in there, the more useful it is to them. And we talked before, Shelley, in a source selection, if you have a bunch of contractors that all have submitted roughly the same price and roughly the same technical solutions, roughly the same types of people, maybe this past performance is what sways the award one way or another. Maybe the past performance allows someone with a higher price to actually win the award because they have a history of better performance that everyone can see. Just like on Yelp, you may not want to hire the cheapest guy to build a deck for your house so that it doesn't collapse and everybody falls off, right? You may want to hire somebody that's a little more expensive but has a history of building decks that actually last.
Something you said, another struck a chord with me, is I have talked to contractors who said, oh, I get those notices and I don't even go in and look and see what's in there. And
I know.
I'm always stunned when I hear that, because you may think you're doing well, but that CPARS is somebody else's assessment of how you're doing. And, and then all of a sudden you're dumbstruck when, you get you've not made the competitive range, or we're not going to further evaluate your proposal because we've used past performance as an evaluation criteria, and you don't have any successful past performance because, again, if even if you're not in a FAR Part 15 source selection where there's a lot more give and take between the contractors, you may never know that they're looking at your CPARS and some of the other type source selections that are out there, competitive acquisitions. And so, and they say, oh, but you've got, 10 bad past performance ratings. And they're like, really? So don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. Please look at your CPARS ratings.
I always think the government can use this much like I use a Yelp review. If I see a restaurant and I see a 1-star review and someone's just raging about a bunch of things, I went there and it was horrible and they look down their nose at me or whatever. I love it when the restaurant replies and says, we're so sorry that you had a bad experience. We are having a bad night, whatever, but owns up to it and says, please come back in. We'll give you a free meal, whatever. I like to see that type of thing. Contractors can really create an image of how they're viewed by the government by owning up to poor ratings and accepting responsibility for what went wrong. It shows that they can learn and do better.
Absolutely. And if the rating is correct and you have to live with that, then you have to start thinking about, well, how am I going to start putting my past performance information together for a proposal to address those poor past performance ratings? I need to write that in such a way to say this is how I fixed it, or whatever.
Yeah, and much better if you've actually captured that in the system for everyone to see up front, that you've owned up to issues and you know how to not let that happen again.
You're not going to let it happen again, right? You've taken corrective action.
All right, speaking of not letting it happen again, why don't we wrap this up instead of keep rambling on and on and on?
We can do that.
All right, thanks, Shelley. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye, Paul.
Okay, that's it for this episode of the Contracting Officer Podcast. Check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Don't forget, our topics are listener-driven, so please send me your ideas to paul@contractingofficerpodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.